Absolutely. Well, good morning. So excited to be here and so honored to be part of this. Thank you to the Joint Center and to Spencer Overton for the amazing thought leadership in so many areas that are important to African Americans across this country. So who are we and what do we do?
Yes.
Who we are the leading federal agency charged with enforcing job discrimination laws that protect against discrimination based on race, national origin, gender, frankly, disability, religion, and genetic information and age. So those bases, and what we have 53 offices across the United States. We're small though, 2,300 people. Only $420 million about in our annual budget, but we punch above our weight. We have brought in every year pretty much more than our budget that we return to people and those who have suffered discrimination on the job. So last year was about $485 million that we returned, more than our budget, to workers who were discriminated against. What we're doing is we are in this moment, and I'm so glad you asked that, because I get up every day thinking about how important this moment is for this country on civil rights. And
this is a rights moment.
This is a rights moment. So the other thing about the EEOC is that we're the agency founded in direct response to the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. And there was, in 1963, an urgent need for equality in the workplace, and unfortunately, our job is not finished. Right now, in addition to all the other things we do, including litigation, outreach, public information, technical assistance, we are focused on two things that are different in this time that I've been chair since 2021. The first is that we're in a pandemic that has had overarching impacts on everyone, but hit people of color really hard in terms of layoffs, in terms of who's the essential workers, and on and on. So we're focused on the civil rights impacts of COVID-19. The other overarching thing, and this is not new, but the awareness, the broad calls for racial justice are new, and that is we're looking at this increase in racial violence. It's always been there. But look, since George Floyd's brutal murder, we have had more people focused on that who didn't really think of civil rights as their issue before. And part of those issues that were laid bare, those inequalities laid bare, both by the pandemic and by those horrific racially motivated killings, is that we have a civil rights problem. We have unfinished business. And so many people who weren't focused on that are now. And we're doing our part in the economic lane. We know there's racial profiling, there's hate crimes. In our economic and access to equal opportunity on the job lane, we are really rolling up our sleeves. That's big picture. We've got a number of priorities: systemic racism and systemic discrimination at the top of that very important list. Lots to say about that. We're still doing our Me Too work, our harassment work, et cetera.
So, Madam Chair, I want to ask a couple questions on this George Floyd moment, this rights moment. You know, we heard for a long time after Barack Obama became president, and I know you guys don't want to hear this, but this was the reality for some people. Oh, racism is no more, you know, right. But the marker was Barack Obama. We are now post-Obama. What did post-Obama look like? It looked like, January 6th. It looked like Black Lives Matter Plaza, stemming from George Floyd.
Sure.
Did you find an ebb and flow in those moments from the Obama years to the Trump years? Like, you know, you had a lot of cases at one point, and then they kind of dwindled off.
So I'm just going to say that we have been laboring in this vineyard for a long time, and that was not, you know, I do remember the moment when people said we're post-discrimination, post-racial America. We did not see that in our caseload, in our work. You know, whether or not there was a change, I would say it's had more to do with you know, sometimes the economy, and if people can just find another job, maybe they don't come and file a charge. But I definitely did not see a turnoff. We have been, and what has changed, and this is important, and this can help make a difference, is what has changed is that we've got more people looking at this. We didn't have a Black Lives Matter moment before, and so that woke a lot of people up to what we were seeing. But we've had, for the last 5 years and beyond that, about a third of all of our charges involve some form of racial discrimination. And we have continued to see these problems. And so what changes is there's a spotlight sometimes with certain things that other people focus on what we know. But just as we were working hard and knew we had a 5-alarm fire on Me Too issues, y'all, on sexual harassment issues, way before it was a household name and, you know, Harvey Weinstein was on the front page of the newspaper and everybody was, we were already doing that work. Yeah. And what changed though is that companies were listening to us and calling us back a little quicker and settling those cases a little faster after the rest of America started looking at it. So I don't want to suggest it doesn't matter. But unfortunately, this is not new. We are making a difference, but it hasn't changed. And we were just in fiscal year 2021, we had a number of multi-million-dollar settlements with respect to African Americans. We had one racial harassment case with Somali Americans out in Colorado. You know, I don't have to tell you that pick your favorite racial slur, that was in the workplace. They were being discriminated against both because they were Muslim and because they were Black and because they were Somalis. And we ended up with about $5.5 million on that one. We had one in Chicago, which is a little bit north of 1 million, which was refusal to hire. Not going to hire. So what was important about that is we got a requirement to hire if people still wanted to work there. That was part of our relief. It's something we do. We've gotten, you know, a significant amount. We continue to see that, and it didn't end with Obama, and it didn't start with January 6th. So we are happy to have more companies really focused on that and more of the American people, not just African Americans, but more of the American people understanding that we have really important unfinished business on that issue.
Madam Chair, as we focus on artificial intelligence and discrimination in hiring and employment, I said this was a rights moment. But I want you to define why it's a rights moment.
Happy to do that. So, big picture, and you've heard the importance of broadband, but we are online like we never have been before. And companies are using artificial intelligence and machine learning and old-fashioned ways of using big data to sort and decide how they're going to do employment things in a really, really broad way. So what that means is recruitment. Online ads are being sent just to the folks that they think might be interested in that, right? Not everybody. We have it with respect to selection. Data being used with an electronic, you know, sorting of applicants. And some of that data is basically, they're assuming, okay, who's the best employee, right? And they're using data about their previous employees who may or may not be diverse, often are not, to say this is who's ideal. So what may happen is you end up with a machine that is taught that your existing employees are what you're looking for, and sometimes those qualifications that get folded in are racial qualifications. There's also surveillance that's being used with artificial intelligence. So how quickly do you need to finish that task? How quickly do you need to deliver that package? How quickly do you need to pack that? So what we're seeing is a lot of the folks who are in those jobs with those surveillance kinds of algorithms driving what your productivity is supposed to be are people of color. So it's jobs with tight deadlines, manufacturing, package deliveries that are disproportionately, you know, men and women, other people of color. And so we're really watching that because essentially it's a civil rights frontier. You don't have an exemption from our civil rights laws, our non-discrimination laws, because you're doing it in a high-tech, newfangled way, right? You don't get out of that. So what we're trying to do is work with companies to have them understand that their obligations still apply and know what to look for. Because a lot of them are buying things off the shelf or from vendors that they did not design themselves. And so they need to also know how to kick the tires, if you will, before they start deploying something.
I heard a lot of groans in the audience about this. You are not picked by a person, you're picked by a chip that's determining your future. That's something.
Well, it's something that, employers are doing, I think, not for, for the most part. We have seen some intentional discrimination in this area, but they're looking for efficiencies. And part of what that means, though, is the data is only as good as the folks who are designing it and whether or not this is a focus, right?
So they could program it they
program
can incorporate all of us.
They could. But the two things that are important about this data, two things to know. That one, there's the data that people are using to pick, who are my top performers, who may or may not come from, they take the resumes, let's say, of their top people. We had one situation where a company was trying to design this themselves, and what they found is that all the women kept getting kicked out of the database because their top performers did not have women's college or women's lacrosse team or women's basketball team on their application. And that was just a word that didn't look like the others. So part of what happens sometimes, depends on how it's designed. It's a design problem. And they finally dropped it. It's a responsible thing to do. They finally said, we haven't been able to figure out how to stop it excluding all the women applicants.
So if they're excluding women applicants, what happens if you're a minority woman?
Exactly.
You're really...
If you look different than the people they've had before, you're not going to be seen. One of the things that has been troubling it, and the Harvard Business Review and Accenture together sort of did a look at this, at hidden workers. And what they found is some of these AI programs are excluding people for things like not having a college degree, even when when it wasn't required for that particular job, and for having a gap in their resume. And that is one thing. So you could have that because you were a caregiver. You could have that because you were incarcerated for a period of time. You could have that for any number of, you were just laid off because you were the first one that they decided to lay off, right? And so those things kind of put in overdrive things that have been problematic for a long time. So fortunately, they've looked at it. We're in a moment now where employers are seeking talent. And so we really have, I think, the opportunity to say to folks, look, stop and think about what you're doing. Now, there are occasional, and we've had some wonderful, helpful conversations with companies to try and educate around that, and I think that there's a real interest in doing that. The one thing I will say is that we have, I don't want to be Pollyannish about it, we have come across some intentional kinds of discrimination. We've got a case going right now with, company that had you put in your birth date when you did your online application, and if it was...
What's the company's name?
It is called iTutor, but I don't
We give
know.
names here.
We do give names. So we're in litigation now, and I won't go into too much detail except to say that what we found is that if your birth date was past, it was, you were older than a certain number, you were kicked out.
When do we get into the part where AI, artificial intelligence, is illegal, unlawful?
Well, artificial intelligence is one of those broad umbrella terms.
Well, the part that you were talking about.
The part that I'm talking about. That's already illegal, right? The problem is most people don't know if they've been screened out by an algorithm or if they just didn't get the job, right? And so what we're trying to do is really, we've got a working group launched an AI initiative at the agency for precisely this problem, to get our folks better at asking the kinds of questions to tease it out, but also understanding how to educate these employers and look for that, and also speaking to vendors. But it is already, some of these things are already unlawful. It's just educating and finding it. And I think we're in a moment where everyone's trying to figure out the best ways to use it, and so we're part of that conversation saying, steer in the right direction.
I'm really intrigued by this, and I'm listening to the groans, the moans, the ahs, the yays, all of that. People are too. But I want to dig a little deeper in this. We talked about women, we talked about blacks. Let's talk about another part of our community, the LGBTQ plus community, and the migrant community. You already talked a little bit about that with other issues and lawsuits, but can you talk about that with these artificial intelligence algorithms when it comes to those communities? Are they suffering as much as women, as blacks, with these types of figuring out who's who for a job?
Yeah, well, so you had two groups, and I'll take them separately. So with respect to LGBTQI plus folks, it really depends on how the AI is structured, right? So depending on, but again, if you have anyone who is different from the existing population, that is used to train that AI system to what are we looking for, you could be at risk. So that right there is potential, right? If there are things that either through the resume or through, it really depends on how they design this, through other characteristics that may be something that is typical for your community, but not typical for the community that is the current employees, there could be an issue, right? With immigrants and migrants, again, it depends on the population. One of the things that we have heard over and over from folks is that, and this goes right to the conversation that was just before us, right? We've got broadband deserts. We have people who are using tech differently or who don't have high-speed internet at all. And if you have, there's a part of this, and the civil rights community has been great at focusing the public and us on this. If you don't have the ability to apply on the computer, you're already out. Forget how they might sort you, right? And so if you're in one of those broadband deserts, or maybe you only have access on your phone, and unbeknownst to you, you're taking an assessment. Some of these assessments, it depends on how quickly you answer or how you answer. If you're doing it on your phone, very different experience than if you had, you know, a laptop or a desktop, which a lot of folks don't have anymore. So, or if you don't have reliable, you know, your broadband, your internet access going in and out. That may affect it, and you don't even know you're doing an assessment. You just think you're having either an interview or filling something out online. You don't know that either the timing or something else has a issue. And I should mention disability, if I may.
Yes, disability, please, yes.
That's
a broad spectrum.
That is a broad
yes.
spectrum. That's another area where people can be left out. And you might need an accommodation, right? You might need an accommodation and you don't even know how that is being used, and so you don't ask for the accommodation. So if you have a computer assessment and there's a keystroke focus on it, and you don't ask for extra time because you didn't know that that mattered, that could be a real problem. And so we pushed out some technical assistance on that to really make sure companies understand what they're expected to do. And again, there's no exemption for discriminating in a high-tech way. If you're discriminating, if you're not offering that accommodation, if you're not including people, it's still unlawful. And so we're trying to make sure that message gets out.
So we've talked about the problem. Let's talk about these companies that are doing this. Let's talk about the solutions. What can they do? You already talked about, you know, reskewing the technology to account for women, to account for this person or that person. But is this actually the right way to go? Should there still be the human touch? And what's a solution if they continue to go down this road of automation?
Well, the two things about that. One of the things that is near and dear to my heart and that we're looking at is the diversity of who's designing these tech programs. This is not a particularly diverse industry. I think they're focused on that. They're not getting there. That's a bit of an understatement. And so one of the things that I'm hoping to focus people on is like, get more of us involved. We did a really, what I think, an important report on diversity in the tech sector in 2016, and we're going to refresh that. We're working on a updated report on that now to really hone in on it. But so that's one piece of it. In terms of solutions for, you know, sort of next piece, I think that if you're gonna, I think that the human touch is fantastic, but the main thing is that we're telling companies, kick the tires on what you're using, know how it works. If you don't know how it works, you probably shouldn't be using it. And if it's gonna have disparate impacts, if it's gonna weed people out, and that's something that we've been looking at with selection devices for a long time, high tech, low tech, medium tech, you will be liable if you cannot show that it's actually getting you the best person. And if you don't even know what it does, you're really you're gonna have a really tough time being able to meet that. That's the legal standard under that same 1964 law that created our statute, right? And it's been amended several times, but you've got to be able to show, if you're using something that has disparate impact, weeds out people of color, weeds out people based on some other characteristic, that you can meet that it's actually working.
But as we're in a rights moment, there's still companies who do want to do that weed out.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's be really clear about that.
Oh yeah.
And they're not ashamed.
And we're clear that there's a cop on the beat for that.
All right.
There's a cop on the beat for that. So that's the other reason we're working with the folks that want to work with us, and we litigate where we have to litigate, and we are rapidly educating ourselves so that we can find that latter category. I don't think that's most companies, but when you find it, you got to be able to go after it. So that's, you got to not just call it out, but call them into court. And so you got to be able to call them into court. But we use all the tools in the toolbox. I'll put it that way.
They need to be very afraid. So I see, really, I see some young people here. How many of you are in STEM? Okay. All right, good. You're reaching the call. What part of STEM are you in, if you don't mind me asking? Don't be afraid. This is a safe space. Economics, okay. Same, and over here, yes.
I'm more in STEAM, but I focus more on the arts.
STEAM, okay, the art, okay. And yes, you, ma'am. Yes. Economics, okay, so there you have it. And I know I'm trying to get my 2 daughters into it, but I said, if mommy leaves, I said, that's one place that you're gonna make money right out the door, starting at $93,000. That was a couple years ago.
Yeah.
For college graduate, $93,000 walking out the door from college with your degree into Silicon Valley. But for the rest of you, if you like computers, you may want to think about that. Even adults.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So with that said, in this moment, what are you fearful and what are you hopeful for when it comes to AI in the future? Because, you know, we have yet to see the end result of what could be, because this could either go one way or the other. It could go down the right path or it could completely go down the wrong path. What is your hope and what is your fear in the future for this?
Love the question. Love the question. Well, I'm an optimist, so hope is going to outweigh fear. I'll just spoiler alert on this. But this is really a time, I love the way you put that there is really a crossroads, because technology is evolving rapidly.
Yes.
And we're in a moment where we got to make sure it evolves in the right way. And if we if we don't focus now and this gets too far away from us, I think it will be and folks get used to doing something a particular way that is very profitable, it will be hard at that point to pull it in. This is new enough and people haven't quite figured out how to do it that we can still put the guardrails in and shape this moment. So I'm hopeful because there's a lot of attention on this, and I think that people are beginning to understand it. I think it's sort of like what Martin Luther King said about time. It's neutral, and you use it either well or you don't. And you gotta make sure the people who are trying to use it well are being more constructive and more active than those who are not. So I'm hopeful because I think the potential is there for it to be harnessed and to be helpful. Now, I won't exclude that, to be helpful. But what scares me is that the civil rights implications are not as obvious to the people who, care about everybody cares about that from the civil rights. That lens comes after, the folks who are experts in what this technology actually does are not the same folks who are experts in the civil rights laws. And so what we're trying to do actually is translate and think about the broader civil rights context. And we are working very closely actually across the administration with, in particular, the Department of Labor's Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs that focuses on those big federal contractors and their anti-discrimination obligations, CFPB, FTC, that have complementary and overlapping kinds of civil rights or workers' rights kinds of roles. And what we need to realize is this is a civil rights issue. We've seen it in housing. We've seen it in, facial recognition to be able to get into your public housing project, y'all. That is a real situation. And everybody who wants to come is going to have their facial, their face in your database. So the other thing that's happening is all this data on poor people and people of color is being collected in ways that we don't know or have control over.
How about that story recently? You guys remember that story? This woman was, I think her DNA, it was her DNA, remember the DNA? It was a case, she was raped. Her DNA was kept and used in another crime. And they weren't supposed to, data that's collected and kept, and they were not supposed to do it. And I forgot, it was in the last couple of months, the danger of collecting data and keeping the data. So you're in someone's file.
Right. And these databases can talk to each other and be pulled together. So there's enormous potential in there. But we should be at the table with respect to how our data is used. And we should be talking about the civil rights implications of that. And I think it's really important to be thinking, it's great to be hooking everybody up so that they have this access, but then also companies are going to want that data. So even as we look about extending broadband and having that done in ways that are, accessible and have the federal government help with that, that shouldn't mean that you lose your privacy because you needed to have, federal government assistance for whatever it is, including your broadband or something else. So those things frighten me a little bit because I think, frankly, the civil rights community has to play a little bit catch up because we're not the ones designing these systems. And it is really important that we keep our eyes on that ball. But also, again, I'm going to end on the hopeful piece of this, enormous potential, and we have the ability to shape this. We have the ability to shape this and to continuously say, when we ask, okay, how is this affecting communities of color? Just asking that question changes the whole conversation. I know, because I do it every time, and kind of like, and the skunk at the party, like, how is this affecting communities of color? You'd be, and the number of people who haven't thought about that yet, it's just clear on their faces, but you change the dynamic, and the conversation is happening right now. I actually come from a family that, not myself, but has a lot of women in STEM. And one of the things that I think is, women and women of color, you're going to be the only one in a lot of situations. So we're also looking at that in some of our diversity initiatives and our anti-harassment initiatives, because what we found is part of what happens is that as you go through some of these higher education programs, it gets more and more. My sister did a doctorate at MIT. In microbiology. And as you go through, right, my great aunt was at NYU in mathematics. And what happens is, and so in between I had an aunt. So, but each generation, what happens is, as you get more and more senior and you get to this PhD level, it's pretty much all white men. Some Asian, there's more and more an Asian population, and in some, there's, but there's very few women and very few women of color.
You're alone.
And you're alone, but there's also, and the National Academies has looked at this a few years ago, there's an issue of harassment or of microaggression. So people don't, even when they get that degree, they don't necessarily decide, I want to keep doing this and do this my whole career. And because everybody else, like I know a number of women who did, lab sciences and, they either went to government or did other things, public health, other things with their doctorate degrees because, I don't know if it was because of this, but the reality was, if you continue doing lab work or you continue in certain fields, you're going to continue being the only one. And so we've got to keep that in mind. So we're really focusing as we talk to companies about, that want to do this DIA work well, how to do that so that it's not you don't have to decide that you're gonna be the only one all the way through your higher education and your entire career, right? Who wants to sign up for that? Particularly, and this is something the National Academies found, there's a lot of harassment of women on a number of bases in these academies, right? And so in the hard sciences, and they really kind of called it out in a report several years ago now. So we're looking at all of that.
And I want to go back to some one AI piece, and then I want to open it up for questions. Think about your question, raise your hand, because someone will be going around with the microphone to ask your question. Okay, let's say a company is in violation and you've taken them to court, as you've promised. And then they don't take the onus of what's going on with excluding people from different communities. But they then lay it on the third party, the company who created the program. What is the outcome for that scenario?
Well, they're still liable.
Okay.
If, say that, oh gosh, we bought this program and we thought it was going to be great and it excluded all the black people. Let's just, just to be a really simple hypothetical. They're still on the hook for that. Wow, we got hands.
Okay, you know what? You know it's a good panel when people are raising their hands. So, all right, who was first? Who was first? And who has the microphone? So, okay, yes, please, yes.
Hey, good morning. Thank you so much. I'm Alex. I'm with the Joint Center. Appreciate your comments, Chairwoman. And I'm curious your take on the gig economy and EEOC's role in enforcing worker protections in this kind of like shadow workforce. More independent contractor opportunities that are on these technological platforms like Handy and TaskRabbit have emerged across the course of the pandemic. And I'm curious how you view EEOC's role in tackling cases of discrimination across various dimensions in the realm of gig work and independent contracting.
Thank you so much.
It's a great question. One of the issues that we have as frankly a constraint, and you'll hear this from a lot of the labor statutes and sort of the NLRA sort of work this way. If you're truly an independent contractor, we don't have the ability to regulate you or to enforce against you. However, and this is important, what we have found is that in a lot of instances, either there's a misclassification where someone's being called an independent contractor, but they're actually an employee. And the other thing that we found is sometimes they really are an independent contractor, but there is an integration with, say, the client in such a way that they're a joint employee, they're both the contractor, but they're also jointly employed by the company. So we see that a lot in, a simple example is like a staffing agency. So they're outsourcing the staff, but the company that is the client company, they're both employees, and we sue both of them. So it really depends on the particular facts, but unfortunately, with true independent contracting situations, our statutes don't allow that, at least without some sort of amendment that could come in the future, but we don't have that authority.
Thank you. Next question. Our STEAM, economics plus STEM.
Yes, economics major. Hello, my name is Paige Scott Cooper. I'm a third-year economics major, leadership studies minor on the pre-law track at Hampton. Yeah, long intro.
Great.
What other colleges are here? Okay, now, come on.
So I wanted to ask, on behalf of me and young black women like me, I wanted to know, how do you get a seat at the table? Do you know what I mean? Like, how do you get the right people to hear you, and who even are the right people that you go to?
Excellent question.
Being here is one of those.
Being here is
one of those
definitely one of those. I have to say, shout out to Hampton. Both my parents went there, although I'm not and my aunt was a chemistry major at Hampton. So,
no, HBCUs, we love you, for real.
Love you.
But I'm Morgan State, yeah.
Okay, love Morgan State too. So being here is definitely one of them. Talking to people and, making those connections and following up. One of the things that I can say for myself, I didn't do well enough was I sort of was raised to be kind of seen and not heard, and people actually.
Wait a minute, you don't think you did well enough?
Oh, I'm not complaining about that, but at the time, I could have done much more.
I'm like, you're doing very well
out.
now.
So when you reach out to people in, like at your stage, people would like to. I always thought, oh, no one wants to hear my question or talk to me or, give me their card. And so I didn't network as much. So you should absolutely continue to do that. I'm sure you're already doing that. And I keep thinking about Shirley Chisholm saying, If you don't have a seat at the table, you
bring
bring
a
a folding chair.
yes.
So that's not acceptable for them to tell you. You get to come and you get to be heard. And when you go to the meeting, you get to be really in the meeting, right? So you don't have to just be quiet because you're, don't just speak up to talk. If you have something to say and you think it's important and you listen a while and you still think it's important, go ahead and say it. So I'm glad you raised your hand. So I think you're doing the right things. I'd be happy to talk more specifics after or whenever, but that's what I would say, is continue the networking and really making those connections, even if you're not quite sure yet where it would go, like just learning the context of what's going on around you, I think will.
And I'm going to challenge you. There are enough leaders in this room for you to reach out to and talk to, and I'm sure they're here for this moment, and they would reach back to you. I would even challenge you, I know he's going to be mad at me, talk to the head of the Joint Center. I'm serious. I mean, let me tell you, for real, there he is. He's waving his hand for you. Make yourself known. He wants you here. You're here for a reason. They're trying to build up the next generation. Am I right?
Absolutely.
Madam Chair? All right, we have time for 2 more questions.
Also,
Good morning. What a pleasure to see you.
Thanks. So good to see you. You know, I'm a huge fan of the 2016 Diversity in High Tech report. I am on pins and needles waiting for the updated report to be released. I highly recommend people read it. The 2016 report has been such a value add to the field. I'm with the KPOR Center. My question for you, Chair Burrows, is can you just speak to accountability options for startups and other small companies with less than 100 employees when it comes to diversity in the industry? Thanks.
Thank you.
That's great. Great question. So in case I assume everybody heard that, with respect to startups, so our diversity collections, we've been doing a data collection actually since 1966, if you can believe it, just to look at the demographics. There's a wonderful book called Documenting Desegregation that actually takes 4 decades of that work and says where we were successful, where we weren't, how things changed, what industries got broken open. And so 100 or more is where we collect the data, which is, I assume is why I got the question shaped that way. But our authority for anti-discrimination laws goes down to 15 people. So it's not, you could be pretty small and still have a legal obligation and legal jeopardy if you are discriminating. With respect to diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, which is the opposite of discriminating, really making sure you bring in that talent across the board. All employers should be looking at this, and also it's in their interest. Every employer that I talk to now is looking for talent, just so you know. If anybody's about to go in the job market, is looking for talent. The last I checked, it was something like 1.8 jobs per person looking for a job. So this is not a time which is a great time to be talking to employers about DEIA, and they are, I think, very sincerely trying to figure that out, because they've figured out what we've known for a long time. A lot of people sitting on the sidelines that have talent. That's why that Harvard Business Review report that I talked about earlier was really trying to say, what are these hidden workers that we've been leaving behind? With respect to those obligations, they need to make sure that they're reaching out, that they have that their outreach is inclusive, that they offer those accommodations, they make sure that they reach all communities. And that's not limited to size, but they have an incentive, even if they aren't in legal jeopardy, they have an incentive to do that, I think, because it really does make a better company. Right? It really does strengthen our economy. We work best when everybody has the opportunity to put their talents in. And that strengthens our society as well as the individual company. So that message is the message we've always carried. It works a lot. We're getting a lot more resonance, I will tell you, in this moment where people are realizing we can't keep employees. And what they're finding is it's also a selling point for people, even if they don't think they're going to, it's a selling point for a lot of millennial white men, because everybody, or most people at least, want to feel like they're working for a company that does right in the world. So that's beginning to get some traction, but they're trying what they can. I don't want to oversell that, but the fact that there's a labor market right now that has employees able to kind of leave and vote with their feet has changed some of the has really sort of changed some of the views.
Isn't it called the Great Resignation? That's what they're calling it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of that has been, the data is still, I think, out there for what that is. But yes, they're calling it the Great Resignation. I think in a lot of cases it's the Great Job Hop. Maybe people just going somewhere else. They're resigning. They're not leaving entirely the workforce. They're going somewhere else. Yeah. And then some folks are...
Because there's opportunity and option on the table.
There's option on the table. But some people are sitting it out because they've got child care in the COVID times.
Yeah. And our last question, and we thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, see, she's excited. She's like, yeah.
You can hear me? I know that's right. Okay. Hello, everybody. Hello, Chair Burrows. Hello, family. My name is Kara Hunt. I'm the Director of Education and Outreach with the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights, so AFIPA.
Great.
And so just for a little bit of context, I earned my doctorate in culture and theory and then went and completed a postdoc, at which time, right, because the humanities are very undervalued in our society, and there was a push for us to seek out employment with nonprofits, local governments, other organizations, which is amazing, right? Because for quite some time we were told, well, you have all of this education but no work experience, so what are we supposed to do with you, right? So I worked in enforcement for a period of time, and I very quickly realized in fielding calls from complainants and even respondents, a lack of education tends to be at the core and very much central to much of the harassment and much of the discriminatory conduct that came to our office. And so I said, okay, this is something we can do something about, right? And so I became the Director of Education and Outreach, created a program called Race in America, Systemic and Structural Discrimination. We move through white supremacy. We talk about the Jim Crow South. We talk about exemptions in the Fair Labor Standards Act, move all the way up to policing, and then talk about employment, right? Because modern employment, as we know it, was developed in opposition to Black folks and people of color in general. So when we're having these conversations, one of the issues that we have, and I'm coming, it's coming, it's coming. I had to give this context. Listen, y'all, I'm almost there, and I'm talking fast. So what we found was that the employers themselves were very much anti-education coming from an enforcement agency. So they felt like, we're here to settle, right? We're here to settle complaints. You all are law enforcement, right? So you come in, you investigate, tell us what we have to do to make this go away. But FIPAs and EEOC are not meant to be educational in nature, right? You're not supposed to come in here and ruffle feathers. But education and outreach is a central tenet for the EEOC, right, and for FIPAs. So do you have any ideas on how we might be able to incorporate that or convince employers that, listen, education is central to anti-discrimination efforts? Thank you for letting me have my long question.
Okay.
That was very long. I didn't make it in the briefing room at the White House, but go ahead.
All right. Education is central, and I think it's building those relationships with employers and also showing them what you can do, that if they do the right kind of compliance, they can prevent it on the front end. So we got their attention with our work on, there was a bipartisan commission at the EEOC, a bipartisan committee on how to prevent sexual harassment and other forms of harassment. Well, believe me, when Harvey Weinstein popped up in the New York Times and you continued to see story after story, they were downloading and clicking and reading that report. We also, during COVID, have a plethora of questions on our website answering how do you deal with all the civil rights issues that are coming up under COVID? What do you look at? And employers have said over and over again, that has been a godsend, a godsend. What do we do with these disability accommodations requests? What, can you take a temperature? Actually, you can't normally, if it's not a pandemic, take your employee's temperature and keep that. That's a disability-related inquiry that you're not supposed to be doing. You're not supposed to ask anything about, are you sick, by your employer. But you could in the pandemic because there was this huge threat to us. So if you show them what you've got that helps them get out of trouble, you can start to build that relationship. So we've done that. So I know there were a number of other questions. You all have been fantastic. And I just thank you so much for your attention.
Yeah. Madam Chairwoman, this has been an excellent conversation, and I love being in dialogue with people who inform me as well as the audience, and I think this was superb, because it's a lot of stuff I didn't know, and I'm going to take back. I might be calling you for an interview soon. But
Anytime.
I want to thank all of you for being great and participating and just supporting this conversation. I want to thank the Joint Center for having me. This was amazing. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.